It's a very good stepping stone. So joining us now to talk about that and so much more, because it was a very busy week, is Alex Smith. She's at Alexandra C. Smith. She's the executive director of America Rising. Alex, joining us on a Sunday evening at the Tim Jones Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Alex, what was your impression of the president's nomination now that you've had a full week to look at this fella named Judge Brett Kavanaugh?
Well, look, I think as conservatives, we just couldn't be happier about this pick. The president gave us a list of very qualified jurists right from the outset. When he was running, he gave us this list in advance, and we were able to see sort of what his thinking was. And I think what really stuck out to me with that list was that all of these people were people who are dedicated to originalism and textualism, which are two of the most important qualities for conservatives. We want people who are going to interpret the Constitution according to its original public meaning, and we want people who are going to look at the letter of the law rather than read in their public policy preferences into it. So, Judge Kavanaugh comes from that list. He has an incredible judicial record, and I think that our takeaway is that he is someone who has such impressive, sterling credentials that the liberals are having a really hard time putting a dent into it. And they've even, resorted to ridiculous attacks like going after him for putting baseball tickets on his credit card. So, I think that's who he tells me all I need to know about the quality of this nominee.
Well, it is really laughable, Alex. The criticisms they're really reaching, and isn't it funny that they had decided before the announcement was made, and we know that because the media, which thankfully this time was in the right place at the right time, caught pictures of the protest signs. So and so blank, Judge blank is an extremist. Fill in the blank. Those were on the protest signs. Maybe they weren't ready for Judge Kavanaugh, because to call that judge an extremist, when you look at his record, you look at his bio, you look at his family, you look at his personality. I thought it was a wonderfully normal American at the press conference. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, the rest of the gang, they immediately called him an extremist. But Alex, isn't it interesting? So many red state Democratic senators are really having a tough time calling him an extremist, aren't they?
They sure are, including Claire McCaskill, who I think you're a little familiar with there.
No comment Claire is what we're calling her now.
No comment Claire. I know. She said, to a reporter, I think as you're referencing here, you want to talk about that Supreme Court thing? We're not going to talk about that. So, this is really putting them into a bind because, I think that, this is what happens every time there's a Supreme Court vacancy. The liberals just go off of their rockers with the kind of apocalyptic doomsday scenarios about Terry McAuliffe from Virginia, the governor of Virginia, former governor of Virginia, I should say, suggested that people might die as a result of this nomination. So, and they were so apoplectic about it, as you mentioned before, that they had pre-programmed press releases written and forgot to out XX as the placeholder. They didn't care who it was. They didn't care what the name was. They just wanted to oppose that person. And someone like Claire McCaskill has a lot to answer for this time around. She voted against Justice Gorsuch, in addition to opposing the president on repealing Obamacare and passing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And so now if she's going to reject yet another nominee from this president, Missourians are going to be looking at her and saying, what did we send you to Washington for?
Well, yeah, Alex, because, it has to do, it's not just political, it has to do with policy, right? I mean, so politically speaking, Missourians made a big choice in less than 2 years ago. They voted for President Trump in our state by nearly 20 points. But 2 years later, they like what he's done policy-wise. Number one, he's kept a lot of the promises he made, which is refreshing for first time for a politician, someone becoming a politician. And if you look at Missouri, most of Missouri, outside of our very liberal inner-city urban cores, the president still enjoys well over a 50% approval rating. So Claire McCaskill, you're right. Doesn't she have to decide what side of the policy fence she stands on? She voted against Gorsuch. She voted against the tax cut. How can Missourians want to reward bad behavior?
Well, and I think that, it just really shows the extremes to which the left is being pushed and Democrats are being pushed, because this should just be a layup for her. I mean, this is a superbly qualified jurist, someone who has an incredible pedigree, a great record of impressive credentials, praise from both sides of the aisle, and this should be a no-brainer. To be someone like Claire McCaskill, even someone like Bill Nelson in Florida, should be able to look at and say, yeah, this person's qualified to sit on the highest court in the land, and we're going to support this person. President Trump, I'm doing something for you.
Alex, yeah, I was going to ask you, so you mentioned Bill Nelson. Have any of the other major red state Democrat candidates, we think of Bill Nelson, we think of Heidi Heitkamp, we think of Joe Manchin in West Virginia, and I know there's several others. Have any of them made any statements, or are they all kind of toeing the line here, like following Claire's lead of no comment, I'm still looking at it, I haven't made up my decision, whereas their leadership, I'm guessing, Chuck and Nancy, are probably banging on them pretty hard to come out against this nomination?
That's the thing, is that if you're Chuck Schumer right now, you have an enthusiasm that you need to keep up for the midterms, and keeping your base happy means opposing the Supreme Court nomination, no matter how ridiculous the tactics or ridiculous the rhetoric. So, he's trying very hard to hold these people into line. I think we're starting to see some breaks. People like Joe Manchin, who actually did vote for Justice Gorsuch last time in West Virginia, he signaled that he, from what he hears so far, that he's impressed by Judge Kavanaugh's record. But someone like Tammy Baldwin, up for re-election in Wisconsin, a seat that the president won in 2016, she already said that she's going to vote no.
Wow.
She's already said that she's not even going to meet with the guy. And so, there's no reasoning with these people. And I think that people are going to see that as extreme. They're going to see that as something that kowtows to to Hollywood donors and not so much their constituents.
Alex, you would think that Democrats would want to be for something, right? You think they would have learned from, Republicans.
Exactly.
Republicans have made this mistake in the past. President Obama got elected twice because largely it was. That's great. It's you definitely have to criticize and point out your opponent's faults, but you have to be for something as well. And I have to wonder, they're against the president's Supreme Court picks. They're against his tax cut plan. They're against him doing anything with any world leader, anywhere, anytime, whether he goes or doesn't go, whether he says something or doesn't say anything. It's all bad. They're against him reducing regulatory burdens because, like you mentioned, people will die. People will die in everything the president does. So I'm trying to find what is the Democrats' positive message on anything for this fall, and I haven't discovered it. Maybe you have, as you look at the national landscape.
Well, they tried. Nancy and Chuck got together, and they put out this thing I call it, is the afterward, called the Better Deal, and it was sort of this recycled gibberish from Hillary Clinton's platform in 2016. Basically talking about broad economic themes, but it didn't make a whole lot of sense, and it definitely was not appealing to the progressives in the Democratic Party, so they sort of rejected it straight out of the gate, and so it really didn't, it just sort of died where it was, and that's really the only attempt that they've made. Otherwise, you really can't get all of these guys on the same page about anything. They can't unite around a single idea. And you see that the extreme left just keeps pushing them to the polar extremes, to the point where these red state Democrats are having to answer for calls to abolish ICE.
Right.
This is an incredibly, I think it's an illustration of how extreme things have gotten for Democrats.
Speaking to Alex Smith, the executive director of America Rising. You can follow America Rising at America Rising. You can follow Alex Smith at Alexandra C. Smith on Twitter. Alex, that's the last thing I wanted to talk to you about. Actually, you just referenced it. There is, the mainstream media, they're really not even mainstream, the liberal media loves to talk about anytime a Republican looks the wrong way at another Republican, the wheels are coming off the wagon over at the GOP and the RNC. And,
exactly.
But isn't the real civil war as far as political parties going on right now in the Democratic Party with this Democratic. I mean, they outright are calling themselves Democratic Socialists, something that you and I probably used to joke about back in the day. Oh, all those socialists on the left. Now they're embracing that. Ocasio-Cortez is coming to St. Louis this week to campaign against Congressman Lacy Clay, who apparently is no longer liberal enough. So isn't that the real problem that's going on that the media does not want to discuss because that's, their crew?
That's a huge problem. And, I saw another report that Bernie Sanders was joining Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in Kansas. And I was like,
wow.
I'm not sure these people are choosing strategically the best places for them. But, look, I think that they illustrate where the Democratic Party is headed. And truthfully, it's a scary place. So I used to do a lot of work with younger voters back in my previous job as national chair for college Republicans. And I used to get asked a lot about millennials and their supposed embrace of socialism. And, the answer that I would frequently give is, younger people, they don't see socialism for what it is, which is history's failures. They look at it as like IKEA socialism, equality for all, and everyone, has good health care and everyone's taken care of.
It's the Harlequin romance version of socialism versus the reality of socialism that we see in Venezuela and Cuba and the former Soviet Union.
Well, yes, and so that's I think where that's where the wheels fall off the wagon, and I think even a lot of people are looking at. Or they started to take a more critical look at Bernie Sanders in the 2016 Democratic primary. They're looking at someone like Ocasio-Cortez and saying, these sound great in principle, but how are you actually going to bring this about? Who's going to pay for this? And I think that the fact that there's so much media adulation of these figures and talking about how this is the future of the Democratic Party is only sort of emboldening them and squeezing out some of these more mainstream Democrats that are saying we don't know how this is all gonna work out here.
That's always the question, isn't it, Alex? Is where is the magic liberal money tree? So yeah. Alex, thanks so much for joining us today. We'll definitely want to have you back. Maybe we can get a comment out of Claire over the next weeks or months. And when she does finally weigh in on Judge Kavanaugh, we'll have you back to discuss her opinion. How's that sound?
Please do. There's nothing more I love than Claire McCaskill.
Alex Smith, thanks for joining us now on the Tim Jones Show. You have a great evening. We'll talk to you again soon.
You as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Alexandra Smith, Executive Director of America Rising. You can follow their great work at America Rising. And Alex can be found at Alexandra C. Smith on Twitter.